Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
At this point, we introduce ourselves. Is there anybody here who is here for the first time or returning after a long absence? Well, then let's say our names. My name is Henry.
Grisha, Kristen, Kitty,
Ron,
Alma,
Ian, Jerry,
Steve,
Matthew,
Jim.
Kevin,
Jeff.
my name's Cass.
Tim, Richard, Jeffrey, Ernie, Stephanie.
Thank you. And online, I will read the names that I can see. Welcome to Greg, Steve, Susan, Richard, Tyler, Harley, Michael, Luis, Jeffrey, Will, Frisco, Andres, John E., Samuel, and Tom. And it is my pleasure to introduce Danadasa. Danadasa began meditating and practicing Buddhism in 1993 and was ordained in the Theravada Buddhist order in 2011 at this place, the San Francisco Buddhist Center. At his ordination, he received his Buddhist name, Danadasa, which in Sanskrit means servant of generosity. In 1995, he developed a heart connection with the archetypal Buddha Amitabha, rooted in the Japanese Pure Land tradition Jodo Shinshu, known in the Western world as Shin Buddhism. He has been practicing an Amitabha sadhana devotional practice since 2011. Danadasa is deeply passionate about teaching meditation, mindfulness, and Buddhism in a somatic and embodied way, bringing the Buddhist teachings to life in our imaginations through images and storytelling. Embodied practice is the path of getting out of our heads and into our bodies, for it is in our bodies that liberation reveals itself. Over the past 20 years, Danadasa has held various administrative and leadership roles within the San Francisco Buddhist Center, and in 2023, he resigned from all of his formal SFBC roles, as well as taking a break from teaching for a period of wandering in the wilderness, free from the external responsibilities, expectations, and social norms of the monastery, following in the footsteps of the great crazy wisdom Mahasiddhas of the past. Since then, many lineage masters and archetypal Buddhas have provided Danadasa with guidance and inspiration, including Tilopa, Naropa, Padmasambhava, Vajrayana, and Machi Labdron. In 2024, Danadasa received Vajrayogini initiation and empowerment. Through Vajrayogini, the mother of all the Buddhas, the meaning of the Buddhist words is beginning to reveal itself. And now we will hear from Danadasa.
Well, welcome to all, and welcome back. So this is the third talk in a 3-week series, and just to quickly recap, very quickly, on week 1, The focus was on early Buddhism and teachings of the Buddha as documented in the Pali Canon. And then last week, which was week 2, we transitioned into the Mahayana, which brought to the fore myth, archetype, and the path of the embodied imagination. And this week, third and final week, we will shift once again into the Vajrayana tradition. These three traditions, early Buddhism, Mahayana, and Vajrayana, are referred to as the three great turnings of the Dharma wheel. And one thing I said earlier, which I'd like to repeat, is that these later developments of Buddhism, of Mahayana and Vajrayana, these are not new teachings that perhaps like contradict the previous teachings, but rather they are just different emphases on the original teachings. So one way to think about this is in terms of doctrine and method, or perhaps theory and practice. So the doctrine is recorded in the Pali Canon, which is the written record of the teachings of the Buddha. And all the practices and all the teachings within the Mahayana tradition and the Vajrayana tradition, they're not new teachings. They're just simply a different emphasis upon these teachings. So we could think of them as new methods, if you will, of the Buddhist teachings. So briefly around this evolution of these three turnings. So in the Pali Canon, in early Buddhism, at the time of the Buddha, disciples of the Buddha, they had a living example of the teachings of the Buddha in the Buddha himself. Someone who walked the earth, who embodied the teachings, and who exemplified the teachings. And after the Buddha died, all of his chief disciples worked very diligently to preserve the teachings of the Buddha, because at the time Buddhism was an oral tradition, so it needed to be preserved. So there was a great deal of effort put into systematizing the teachings and categorizing the teachings and whatnot. And this period lasted roughly, 500-ish years. And Buddhism became, from the perspective of some, Buddhism became had a strong emphasis on the scholastic aspect of the teachings, just in terms of preservation. So this led to the development of the Mahayana tradition. And those practitioners in the Mahayana tradition, they felt that the living essence of Buddhism was somehow getting lost in this more technical approach to Buddhism, this more scholastic approach to Buddhism. So one can think of this perhaps as, the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. So the Mahayanas felt that the practitioners of early Buddhism were really emphasizing preserving the letter of the law, but something about the spirit of the law was getting lost in that. So with the Mahayana tradition, what came to the fore was the embodied imagination. And the language of the embodied imagination is myth, archetype, and poetry. And the beauty of myth, archetype, and poetry is the mind automatically knows to not take this language literally. And in terms of poetry, myth, archetype, this language, it tends to bypass our cognitive, rational minds and speak directly to our hearts. This is also true with music as well. So in the Mahayana, there was the development of a great pantheon of archetypal Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and all these various phantasmagorical practices. Now, in terms of the evolution of the Vajrayana tradition, so the Vajrayana tradition, or the third great turning of the wheel, this really arose when the Mahayana tradition spread specifically into Tibet. And that's where the Vajrayana tradition actually came to life, came into being, if you will. About the way Buddhism spread, or the way Buddhism evolved, is whenever the teachings of the Buddha entered into a new culture, Buddhism went through this process of integrating itself into that new culture, so it would take on flavors of the new culture, aspects of the new culture, to make it more accessible to those individuals within that culture. So that's true here in this country, in the United States, and it's also true in terms of Tibetan Buddhism as well. Okay. So that's all I'll say about the recap. So that's where the ground we've covered so far. So around the development of Vajrayana, the indigenous spiritual practice, the indigenous religion of Tibet at the time was the Bon tradition. And the Bon tradition is, it's fundamentally, at its essence, it's a shamanic tradition. It's an animistic tradition. So animistic means everything is alive, and we are in relationship with everything. So it's very interesting to contrast, I'll say American Buddhism versus Tibetan Buddhism. So I'll start here with American Buddhism. So this country is founded on this principle of rugged individualism. So that the Great Revolution was, we rejected feudalism. Don't tell us what to do. And actually in New Hampshire, if you've ever been to New Hampshire, their license plates have their state motto on the license plate. So every single car has on it, "Live free or die." This is the roots of this country. Don't tell me what to do. Live free or die. Don't mess with Texas. Or else you know what's coming. So you juxtapose that with a Tibetan tradition. And I do want to say this, that in the East, at that time, historically, these were all feudal societies. Right? So that definitely shapes the minds of the individuals in that culture. So you have a feudal society, you have a animistic and shamanic kind of flavor to the culture. So it's very easy for the Tibetan mind to be devotional. So take the example of bowing to a shrine. So this is a shrine. It's an image of the Buddha. And in Western circles, there's always this kind of tension or debate, if you will, around, well, should we bow to the shrine? Should we not bow to the shrine? So I notice within GBF, we don't bow to the shrine, which is fine. Within the Triratna Buddhist community, this San Francisco Buddhist Center, we do bow to the shrine. Different strokes for different folks. But the reason that Westerners don't bow to the shrine is because it's like, well, what's this bowing about? I'm not going to bow to the shrine. So here's another example that's just embedded in our Western minds. It's like, is this a cult? Right? So if anyone has ever seen that Netflix special, Wild Wild Country, right, about Bhagwan Rajneesh Osho, that's an amazing story about a cult gone wrong. So that's very much a part of our psyche. So it's like, oh, bowing to a shrine, what's that about? And it requires an explanation. And many people are like, oh, about that. And you also get, there is also in this country a manifestation called secular Buddhism. Right? In secular Buddhism, I don't want all of that religious stuff. Just give me the teachings. Give me the techniques. I don't want any of that myth, that archetype. No, thank you. So that's part of our cultural inheritance here in the West. Now, to juxtapose that with Tibetan Buddhism and this notion of bowing to the shrine, there's a practice today. It's present. It's been there for many centuries of Tibetans doing pilgrimages to Lhasa. And in these pilgrimages, the pilgrims, they will prostrate, full-length body prostrations the entire way. And the traditional way to do this is take 3 steps, full-length prostration. Boom. And there's this wonderful film. It's called Paths of the Soul. I don't know if anybody has seen this film, Paths of the Soul. And the thing that's so beautiful about this film is it's a window into the mind, the Tibetan mind, like culturally. So this film, it's not a documentary, it's just a narrative about a group of Tibetan villagers. And there's one person who has this lifelong dream. Oh, I've always wanted to go to Lhasa on pilgrimage. And from this village, it was about 800 miles. And this one person decides, I'm going to go. I'm going to do this before I die. I'm going to do this pilgrimage. And as this news spreads, then his cousin comes in. Can I go with you? And then another. Can my son go with you? Can my mother go with you? So then what happens in this movie is then there's this whole caravan of these Tibetan villages that decide to go on this journey. And this film just tells the story of their pilgrimages. So just watching the trailer is just like this line of about 12 people on this deserted road. It's like snow-covered. This is like high altitude. And they're just 3 steps. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. For 800 miles. You're not going to find a single American who'd be willing to do that. So this is the nature of call it cultural inheritance. Right, and I do want to emphasize that this was a feudal culture. All right, so again, like devotion. So no matter what tradition we practice in, no matter what approach we're taking, there's always pitfalls to no matter what you do. There's shadows to everything. Okay, so now I'd actually like to just speak much more personally about how the Vajrayana tradition has shaped my journey and really opened up things for me in terms of practice. So I've been practicing with the Theravada Buddhist community for about 30 years now. And it's been a wonderful journey. And about 4 years ago, I entered into a very, very deep conflict with two very important people within this community. And I'll just name that they were both, they're both in positions of institutional authority. And this conflict, it lasted for a good 3 years. And again, I'm just going to speak for myself. My experience of this conflict was that I felt dismissed, ignored, marginalized, and blamed repeatedly within this conflict. And it completely sucked. It actually shook the foundations of my practice in a very profound way. So one of the threads in this practice that arose, one of the threads in this conflict that arose very early was these two men that I was in dialogue with. They repeatedly told me that my anger was a problem. And I trusted them. And the thing about anger is, culturally, it's not acceptable to get angry. Fair enough. And actually, you can get this message. You do get this message from early Buddhism, as well as the Mahayana tradition. So, for example, in the Mahayana tradition, there is one of the great Mahasiddhas goes by the name of Shantideva, and he is best known for one of his teachings called the Bodhicharya Avatara, which is translated as the way of the Bodhisattva. And in one of his chapters, it's chapter 6 on patience, chapter 6, verse 1. This is what Shantideva teaches. All good works gathered in 1,000 ages, such as deeds of generosity and offerings to the blissful ones, a single flash of anger shatters them. All good works gathered in 1,000 ages, a single flash of anger shatters them. Yikes. Don't get angry, don't get angry, don't get angry. And I was angry. But I tried to bottle it up. Right? It's like, no kidding. So what I began to do was, I didn't know it at the time, I began engaging in spiritual bypassing. As a matter of fact, in retrospect, I was doing that for 27 plus years. So in this conflict, I was feeling like I was being mistreated, which I was. And, don't get angry, I need to generate loving kindness. Okay, may I be well, may I be happy, may this person be happy, may this person be well, da-da-da-da-da-da. And I was just covering over my lived experience. I was just painting it over with loving kindness. And it was working, kind of, sort of. And that was actually how I practiced for many, many years, for my entire spiritual journey. And a dear friend of mine suggested to me I don't know if that's such a good idea. Anger, it's a very human experience. There's nothing wrong with being human. And this is really when the Vajrayana tradition really came to the fore for me. So in early Buddhism, as well as in the Mahayana tradition, you can very much get the impression of the instruction is don't get angry. Whereas in the Vajrayana tradition, the approach, the method is quite different. It's, actually bring everything on the path, including anger. And within the Vajrayana tradition, right, they speak about anger. It's simply energy. That's all it is. And this energy can be redirected in pursuit of the good. And the path of this process of transforming anger into compassion or anger into wisdom, it requires us to first surrender to our anger, to accept our anger, to practice self-love around our anger. So this was a very tough pill for me to swallow. So I began by first giving myself permission to get angry. Because for me, it was, from my childhood, it's like, don't get angry, don't get angry. And then Buddhism, don't get angry, don't get angry. So I was cut off from my experience of anger. So I went through this process of reclaiming my anger, which, again, these two men gave me the feedback of don't get angry, so I was to blame. And my exploration of anger, it was really guided by Lama Rod Owens, who's a black Southern Buddhist, and he wrote a book. He's written 2 books now, but his first book is entitled Love and Rage, bringing anger onto the path. And I read that book, and it was so eye-opening to me to hear a Buddhist practitioner speak so positively about anger. So I shifted from this sort of spiritual bypassing, which I'll call is, you have good stuff and you have bad stuff. Okay, out with the bad, in with the good. Oh, anger, bad. Out, out, out. And of course, just by denying anger, there's a saying from the mindfulness community, what one resists persists. Our anger just gets banished into the underworld, into our unconscious and subconscious. It doesn't actually go away. Nothing gets healed there. So this is spiritual bypassing, and I came to see that the Vajrayana tradition was actually about holistic self-acceptance. Right? We take all of ourselves on the path. Everything, including our anger. So in this exploration of anger, again, this is guided by Lama Rod Owens. He invited me to inquire into what lies beneath the anger. And this is a really interesting question. Like, what lies beneath the anger? So, first give myself permission to get angry. Just let that energy out. Just let it arise, let it fade, and deal with the collateral damage later. Because it was very painful for me internally to get angry, and I am absolutely certain that it was very painful for others to be on the receiving end of my anger, or even to witness my anger that was not directed at them, but rather to someone else. So just as a culture, we're just we're conflict averse. So as I began to inquire what lies beneath the anger, well, what was there was unmet needs. I had a need, I have a need to be treated with dignity and respect. That was not happening. I raised it. I got denied. I got blamed. That made me angry. It's like, okay, that's fine. I'm angry. I get it. Thank you, anger. Lama Rod Owens also speaks about this, is anger serves a very important purpose. Anger protects us. When we feel threatened, when we feel unsafe, that's what's being indicated by anger. I feel unsafe. So I felt unsafe. That's interesting. Okay, well, where am I looking to get these needs met? Turns out I was looking for love in all the wrong places. So there was the sense of unmet needs, there was a sense of grief, sense of betrayal, a sense of very deep sadness, very, very deep sadness, this well of sadness, this ocean of sadness. So it was a very painful place to inhabit. And I also knew that this was the path of transformation. I just knew this. I had confidence in this. Although I was, kicking and screaming as I was being dragged into the underworld. There's no doubt about that. So the reason this conflict lasted for 3 years is because I continued to fight. And I see in retrospect that this fight had everything to do for me with being embedded in the Mahayana tradition rather than the Vajrayana tradition. So what I mean by this, in the Mahayana tradition, right, there's a very strong emphasis on our interconnectedness, the sense of we are all in this together. Right? So you get this teaching from the Bodhisattva ideal, which is a central teaching from the Mahayana tradition of, I will not enter into a state of enlightenment because until all other suffering beings enter enlightenment. Right? We're all in this together. My enlightenment is connected with your enlightenment. Right? So how can I be of service? How can I be of service? So I was fixated on the outer world, on the relational world. And what arose for me in this conflict was the fight was killing me. It was just draining the life energy out of me. And I experienced my own anger as being toxic. It was like eating poison. So I chose to walk away from this conflict. And it continues to be unresolved externally. And I chose to focus internally on the mess internally. Right? So the world out there, it's a big hot mess. It is what it is. Right? I can't fix it. I tried to, and the fight was killing me. You know what? I need to withdraw and focus on the big hot mess here, internal. Right? Just let that all go. Which is what I did. So I walked away from the conflict, and I also, in my bio, I said that I removed myself from all institutional roles and responsibilities as well as teaching, and I framed that as a period of wandering in the wilderness, of leaving the monastery, which really means it symbolizes leaving behind all social norms of any given social group, expectations of how to behave, what's good and what's bad. And wandering in the wilderness really means being guided by one's own inner wisdom. And from a Vajrayana perspective, right, it's not my inner wisdom that I'm being guided by. It's actually the inner wisdom that I receive from all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So it's actually a surrendering of me. And when I say this, it's a surrendering of I'm in control, I'm curating the show. So this is good. Yes, yes, yes. That's bad. No thank you, no thank you. Here's a great question. How's that working out for you? Right? So it's this need to be in control. This is what the self does. Right? So it's surrendering this self, surrendering to what is the path of practice. So let me tell you about one of the practices that I do. It's quite interesting. It's introducing cognitive dissonance just directly into my mind. So this kind of corresponds to the practice of koans in the Zen tradition. So for example, I would meditate and I would say, repeat, slogans to myself like this. I am pure. I am sacred. I am primordially empty, like space. And these two men that I'm in conflict with, I would say, these two men are sacred, are pure, and primordially empty, like space. So in the early days when I would say this, right away it's like, no way. That's crazy. There's nothing pure about what happened in that conflict. There is nothing sacred about what happened in that conflict. Yeah. Actually, to be completely honest, their actions to me are unforgivable. The way this stands. It's not forever, but that's the way I feel. And as I continue to do this practice, what I have come to see is it is this act of cognitive dissonance. So in the Vajrayana tradition, actually it's not just the Vajrayana tradition, it's all a Buddhist tradition. They will speak about non-dual awareness, or they'll speak about direct experience, or big sky mind, pure awareness, rigpa. There's all these just words that are pointing at non-dual awareness. So what is this talking about? What's this pointing at? Well, let's first talk about dual awareness. Well, dual awareness is like, anger, bad. Loving kindness, good. That's a duality. Right? In non-dual awareness, our perceived conflicts, they just simply dissolve. It's actually quite mysterious. So, knowing that the mind is fundamentally dualistic in the way that it operates, good, bad, etc., we actually, the Vajrayana tradition uses this quality of the mind to liberate the mind. Right? So it's not that I am pure, or it's not that others are impure, because that's just a dualistic way of thinking, pure and impure. Those are just simply labels. Same with something is sacred, something is mundane. These are just all labels, and it's dualistic. But it's actually a method. So by introducing into my own mind that these two men, as well as myself, are pure and sacred, it stops my narrative. Somehow it shakes it loose. Right? And the only way out is to allow the entire conflict to dissolve. So it is this experience of letting go. So in the Vajrayana tradition, they speak about enlightenment as the inseparable union of bliss and emptiness. The inseparable union of bliss and emptiness. So emptiness is a vast topic. I can't really say much about that. What can you say? But bliss, right? Again, cognitive dissonance. There was nothing blissful about this conflict. Nothing. So what's this word bliss pointing at? Well, the Buddha was very clear about this in terms of discerning two different kinds of pleasure. So there is the worldly pleasures, which are about, this is what I want, and when I get what I want, then I'm happy. That's what worldly pleasures are. And the marker, the indicator of a worldly pleasure is it always leaves you wanting more. You can never get enough of worldly pleasures. So the Buddha also defined a second type of pleasure, which is translated as unworldly pleasures. And that's what this word bliss is pointing at. So it's not about just pleasure. It's actually, bliss is actually the pleasure that arises from letting go. It's the pleasure that arises from surrendering. So I can notice this now that I've been practicing this way of thinking that I am pure and sacred and all of my enemies are pure and sacred, that the whole world is pure and sacred. There's something in me that has that just has loosened up and just opened up, where I am holding much less tightly, yet I continue to feel deeply. So I'll say one more thing about forgiveness. Again, it's like their actions are unforgivable. And one of my new practice slogans is this. It's a very deep contemplation. When I do not take things personally, there is nothing to forgive. When I do not take things personally, there is nothing to forgive. So I rely on the grace of all the Buddhas. Surrendering oneself. Well, if I'm not relying upon myself, who am I relying on? And it is the grace of all the Buddhas. Okay, so I've got about 10 minutes, so I'm going to draw this to a conclusion with a little story. And this is a story of the 4-minute mile. So the 4-minute mile, this barrier, it was broken in 1954. And for decades, people felt that it was not possible for a human being to run a 4-minute mile. Like this was the holy grail. Runners were trying to run a 4-minute mile for decades, and nobody could do it. So people started to question if it was even physically possible for a human being to run a 4-minute mile. And then in 1954, somebody broke the 4-minute mile. And then what happened? It's really fascinating. About a month later, another person broke the 4-minute mile. And then the next year, 3 more runners broke the 4-minute mile. And many, many runners have done this after this, since then. So it's very clear in retrospect that this was a psychological barrier rather than a physiological barrier or physical barrier. And this story really, really highlights the powers of our beliefs. So, at the end of last week, I invited us to contemplate this question. Can you imagine yourself as being completely free of stress and anxiety at all times and under all conditions? Can you imagine yourself being completely free of stress and anxiety at all times and under all conditions? That was the question. I also said something about when we enter into the embodied imagination, the realm of the embodied imagination, it's not helpful to ask, is this true? But rather it's much more helpful to ask, is it helpful? So whether or not you think you can be completely free of stress and anxiety, doesn't matter. It's actually helpful for you to think this. It's helpful for me to think this. In the same way for these runners, they had a living example of someone who broke a 4-minute mile. And they said, wow, if that person can do it, so can I. There's the Buddha. If that person did it, so can I. And I get this all the time. Well, how'd you know he was enlightened? I don't know if he's enlightened. I don't know anybody enlightened. It's fine. Who cares? It's helpful. It's helpful to simply trust that. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to guide us in a short little meditation to draw us to a conclusion. Fantastic. Thank you. Henry? George? Henry. Thank you, Henry. Yeah, so please make yourselves comfortable in your meditation postures, in your bodies. That's good. I'm a fan of yawning. And I'd like to just drop this affirmation into our mind. I trust that I can become completely free of stress and anxiety at all times and under all conditions. I trust that I can become completely free of stress and anxiety at all times and under all conditions. O Namo Bhagavati Vajravarahi Bang Hong Hong Pe. O Namo Ariyapa Rajite Trailokya Mati Vidye Shivari Hung Hung Pe. O Namo sarva bhuta Bhayavahi Mahavadre Hung Hung Pe. O Namo Vadrasani Ajite Aparajite Vashankari Netre Hung Hung Pe. O Namo Brahmani Shoshani Roshani Krode Karalene Hung Hung Pe. O Namo Trasahani Maharani Prabedani Parajaye Hung Hung Pe. O Namo Vijaye Jambani Stambani Mohani Hung Hung Pe. O Namo Vajravarahi Mahayogini Kame Shivari Kange Hung Hung Pe. Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakhantu sabba devata sabba buddhanubhavena sada soti bhavantu te. Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakhantu sabba devata Sabadamanubhavena sada soti bhavantu te. Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakhantu sabba devata sabba sanghanubhavena sada soti bhavantu te. May all blessings be yours. May all deities protect you. By the power of all the Buddhas, may all happiness be yours. May all blessings be yours. May all deities protect you. By the power of all the Dharma, may all happiness be yours. May all blessings be yours. May all deities protect you. By the power of all the Sangha, may all happiness be yours. Jai Bim. Thank you all for your kind attention. It's been a delight and an honor to be here with all of you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Danadasa. Do we have any announcements? Jerry.
I'm your host today. Please stay and enjoy the company of the Sangha. There are refreshments and hot water for tea. If you use a cup, when you're finished, put it in the dishwasher or leave it in the sink. I'll be going around with a dime bowl to accept contributions to cover our expenses. Your generosity is appreciated. Donations in the range of $10 to $20 help the Sangha meet the expenses. These include honoring for our Dharma speakers, rent for this beautiful center, and today we're sending out our newsletter and mostly mailed to people in prison. Also, your Dana helps us pay for scholarships for retreats. There's a newcomer sign-up sheet on the credenza. If you wish to be included and receive our Sangha membership directly, please sign up and include contact information you wish to share with the group. Finally, some members go out to lunch after the meeting. Everyone is welcome to join you. The group meets at the front door around 12:30.
Thank you.
Not today.
But not today.
But not
Some
today.
people, we might be fast.
Jack, would you like to say anything?
Please stay. After 10 or 15 minutes of chatting, we'll put together the newsletter for mailing out to all those guys.
How many people would you put like?
What's that?
How many volunteers would you like to help?
A dozen at least. Hands. Hold your hands up. Thank you. That'll be kind of quick.
Can we start sooner than, can we start
Yeah, let's.
right away?
Oh, right away. I want one of those little.
I think there can be a short pause.
Yes, yeah.
Jim, you can start right away.
Yeah, I know.
No, it's very systematic. We've got this.
Danadasa, would you like to lead us in a dedication of merit?
Again.
Yours.
With yours?
Yeah.
Cass knows.
Cass knows.
By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.